Neurons from the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system. Over 10 million sensory neurons are present, and these deliver information from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. And the cell bodies of the sensory neurons are located in peripheral nervous system or the peripheral sensory ganglia. A ganglion is a collection of the neuron cells bodies in the It is the collection of the neuron cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. And sensory neurons collect information about the internal and external environment, both one. Suppose a fire or some hot material if you touch, you will immediately withdraw your hand. This is because the sensory, whenever you touch a heated material, then through the sensory afferent nerves, the impulses are carried from your skeletal muscles to the central nervous system, and there it is processed and it gives a motor stimulus to withdraw your hand. And the somatic sensory neurons monitor the outside the world. Somatic means under your control. Visceral sensory neurons monitor internal conditions and state of the organ system, especially the visceral organs. And the sensory neurons the receptors are either sensory receptors, either process of the specialized sensory neurons and cell monitored by the sensory neurons. And receptors are broadly categorized as the exteroceptors, proprioceptors, and interoceptors into three varieties of classification. What are exteroceptors? Provide information about the external environment in the form of the touch, temperature, pressure, sight, smell, hearing. So this is carried out by exteroceptors, whereas the proprioceptors monitor the position and movement of the skeletal muscles and joints, whereas the interoceptors do monitor internal organ system. And the interoceptors provide sensation of the taste, deep pressure, and pain. So this is the function of the interoceptors. And interneurons. So you have to understand all these basic terms, or else you will get what you call as out of the memory age. And the interneurons outnumber of all other types of the neurons combined, mostly located in the brain and the spinal cord, responsible for the distribution of sensory information and the coordination of the motor activity. Both are carried by the interneurons, and one or more interneurons are located between sensory neurons and motor neurons. Of course, the interneurons are also involved in the higher functions like keeping the memory and learning behavior. So in this particular diagram, we can see the functional classification of the neuron, just like the interoceptors. So interoceptors, here you can see we are going to collect peripheral nervous system with that of the central nervous system, and both these exteroceptors and proprioceptors do what you call as the connect between the what you call as interneurons and somatic neurons, whereas they are also going to process the signal and give a stimulus to the skeletal muscle fibers, whereas the smooth muscles and the glands and cardiac and adipose tissues, they are supplied with the postganglionic fibers of visceral motor neurons in the peripheral or motor ganglia. And of course, this is also receiving the impulses from the visceral motor neurons and in the central nervous system. Visceral, usually the red is here, the red is sensory, whereas the green is sensory and motor. And four types of the neuroglia are in the CNS: ependymal cells related to cerebrospinal fluid, whereas the astrocytes are the largest and numerous, So maintain blood-brain barrier. Astrocytes are the one which are surrounding the endothelial cells, especially in the central nervous system. It's a specialized type of the tissue, astrocytes, and these maintain the blood-brain barrier. And oligodendrocytes, myelination of the central axon, and the microglia are the phagocytic cells of the brain. And the neuroglial cells, here you can see the satellite cells surround the neuron cell bodies in the ganglia and regulate oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrient, and the neurotransmitter level around the neurons in the ganglia. Means the oxygen, etc. The regular supply to the neuron cells is carried by the satellite cells, whereas the neuroglia are classified into peripheral system, neuroglia of the central nervous system. Whereas the central nervous system lead to ependymal cells, then line ventricles, brain and central cord, that's also the spinal cord, assist in producing, circulating and monitoring of the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. Whereas the oligodendrocytes myelinate central nervous system axons and provide structural framework, whereas the astrocytes maintain blood-brain barrier. Astrocytes, they surround the endothelial cells of the neurons of the brain, especially maintain blood-brain barrier and provide structural support to the particular neuron and regulate ion, nutrient and dissolved gas, especially exchange of the exhausted gas and many other matters. And these also absorb the recycled neurotransmitters and form the scar tissue after injury. And the Schwann cells surround axons and peripheral nervous system of the peripheral nervous system, are responsible for the myelination of the peripheral axons. And these Schwann cells do participate in repair process after the injury to a nerve. This happens many times. Ependymal cells, the central canal, etc., and ventricles within the brain. Ependyma is made up of ependymal cells, and ependymal cells in the ventricles are ciliated, means they have got what you call as the cilia. And CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, fills these areas, ependymal cell area. And what is the function of the cerebrospinal fluid? It provides a protective cushion to the spinal cord is content and the brain, and it also transports the dissolved gases, nutrients and waste materials. And astrocytes, largest and most numerous, and maintain the blood-brain barrier, isolation of the central nervous system from the general circulation. This is a protective layer. Astrocyte is the protective layer which separates the central nervous system from the periphery, and astrocytes wrap around the endothelial cells lining and the capillaries and regulate ion, nutrient and dissolved gas concentrations, and the astrocytes absorb and recycle neurotransmitters and form scar tissues after injury and stabilizes and prevents the further injury to the brain. And oligodendrocytes, here you can see that this is the oligodendroglia. Tip of the exolemma expands to form a large membranous pad, and this gets wound around the axon. This is the axon, and the membranes wrapping the insulation is called as the myelin sheaths. So this is the myelin in the central and nervous system. Myelin improves the functions of the performance of the neuron by insulating it. So usually myelin system, this myelin tissue is, so here you can see this is the axon and this is the nucleus and oligodendrocytes and insulating exolemma. So each oligodendrocyte is myelinates the segments of several axons, and these large areas of the axon are wrapped in the myelin that is called as the internodes. Here you can see that internodes, the small gaps that separate adjacent internodes are called as the nodes of the Ranvier. Here you can see that the small gaps that separate adjacent cells are known as the rods of these nodes of the Ranvier, whereas the myelin sheath containing nodes of the Ranvier are known as the Schwann cells. And axons may branch at these nodes into collateral branches. So branching will occur, and many oligodendrocytes cooperate to form the myelin sheath. Really, oligodendrocytes. So regions dominated by the myelinated axons make up the white matter of the central nervous system. Regions dominated by the unmyelinated cells make up of the gray matter and white matter. So this is the ventricles, this is the ventricle, this is the outside one is the gray matter and white matter. Microglia are the least numerous and smallest of the neuroglia in the central nervous system. Microglia appear early in the embryonic development, and microglia migrate to central nervous system as the nervous system forms, and they remain isolated in nervous tissue thereafter. And whereas the function of these microglia is to engulf the cellular debris, waste products, or the pathogens. So they serve as the scavenger cells of the nervous system. So coming to the peripheral nervous system, two types of the cells are involved. One is the satellite cells and the other one is the Schwann cells. And cell bodies of the neurons in the peripheral nervous system are called as the clustered in masses called as the ganglia. Cell bodies of the neurons in the peripheral nervous system are clustered. Are called as the ganglia, and the neuron cell bodies and most axons in the peripheral nervous system completely insulated from the surroundings by the process of neuroglia, specifically the satellite cells and the Schwann cells. Satellite cells are also called as the MP sites. They are also known as MP sites, and surround the neuron cell bodies in the ganglia, regulate the environment around neurons in peripheral nervous system, just like astrocytes do in central nervous system. So the MP sites do have the protective property of the peripheral nerves as the astrocytes do in central nervous system. So here you can see that the Schwann cells are like this, Schwann cells and nucleus. This is a cell and this is a Schwann cell here, and this forms the sheath around the peripheral axons. Of course, this is an axon and node of Ranvier, and the Schwann cells covers an axon. The outer surface of the Schwann cell is the neurolemma. And most axons in the peripheral nervous system are myelinated and unmyelinated, are separated from interstitial fluid by Schwann cells. A series of the Schwann cells is required for the enclose in the axon along with the entire length. It also serves as the protective layer. And demyelination. What is a demyelination? Demyelination is a progressive destruction of myelin sheaths, both in the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, and it results in the loss of the sensation and motor control that leaves affected regions numb and paralyzed. So the several unrelated conditions can cause demyelination, including the heavy metal poisoning, diphtheria, multiple sclerosis, and pernicious anemia. All these will cause the condition called as the demyelination. This myelin tissue, outside tissue is known as the myelin tissue, and whenever such disease are there, then this tissue is destroyed. And here this is a very typical, what you call as the neuron. Once again, for your remembering, cell membrane. This is the cell membrane or exoplasmic membrane, and the dendrites. And this is the cell body and axons, and these are known as the oligodendrocytes, whereas this is a node of Ranvier. It's a continuation of the axon. In between the myelin sheath, it is exposed. That's known as the node of Pranava, and ultimately it synapse with a effector cell. So now coming to the neurotransmitters, the important neurotransmitters are the one which transfer the sense or the impulse from one neuron to the another neuron, or one neuron to the effector site. So that's a neurotransmitter. The major neurotransmitters are the acetylcholine. This is a structure of acetylcholine. So this is excitatory to the vertebrates, and CNS, PNS, peripheral nervous system, vertebrate, and neuromuscular junction, and do have the biogenic amines are the norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Whereas the amino acids, the type of the classifications are the gamma aminobutyric acid. Gamma aminobutyric acid, glycine, glutamate, and aspartate, especially in the central nervous system. And neuropeptide Y, substance Phi, and metenkephalins, especially we learn these are all the neuropeptides derived the major neurotransmitters. Apart from this, and also many other neurotransmitters are there, and we will learn them in the future classes, of course. Neuromodulators are the substances that can influence the neuronal activity in a manner that's different from that of the neurotransmitter. It is a neuromodulator is the one which modulates the neurotransmission. That's known as the carbon dioxide, ammonia, steroid hormones, arachidonic acid, and metabolites are also known as the the neuromodulators. And neuromediators are the substances that the participate in eliciting of the postsynaptic responses to a neurotransmitter. The cyclic AMP is known as the